Shit.
Yes.
God damn it. No, you're not. But hold
No.
on a second.
Okay.
Because now I have to figure out how to do this because I fucked it up again. Mother of pearl. Okay. Aaron showed me how to do this. He did. Let me see if I can figure it out again real quick. Okay, so we pull up the yellow duck. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. I have Carol of the Bells stuck in my brain for some stupid reason, and I'm not really sure what the hell is going on here. Oh, I should know how to do this on my own. I really should. So thank you for reminding me to do that yellow duck or the Instagram. I do not know that he set this up, which password he set this up with. So this could be interesting. God fucking damn it. Okay. Shit. Okay. Hold on a second. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
A little frustrated at this moment.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know. Aaron set this up for me, but I don't know the username or email.
Well, that doesn't work.
Okay, it seems to want to be doing something, so let's see. Oh, okay, yep, that's me. That's me. RMTP. Okay, so this is the RMTP stream key. Is that what I need to enter?
What's your problem?
I think.
Problems in my lab?
Add destination, maybe. RMTP. Ha! I think I've got it. Okay, I think I figured this out. So.
You have a penny.
No, you're supposed to paste. Ah, son of a bitch. Let's go ahead and we'll get started here. So welcome to episode 38 of Murder in the Moonlight.
Yay!
For those of you who are new here, I'm Emily.
I'm Moxie.
You may know Moxie as Kate. It is a recent name change.
Yep. And today we are talking about the disappearance of the Sodder children. I don't know if you want me to just get started into that while you're still working on stuff.
Yeah, go ahead and get started. I think I have it figured out. I need to check one thing out first.
Okay.
But no, go ahead and get started.
All right. So, this story starts on Christmas Eve of 1945, in which a fire destroyed the family home of the Sodder family in Fayetteville, West Virginia. So at the time, the family consisted of the father, George Sotter, his wife, Jenny, and they had 10 children, but one of them, the oldest, was already in the army, and so it was their 9 younger children that lived at home. During the fire, the father and mother and the oldest 3 children and the youngest child, who was 2, the mother grabbed the youngest child, and they ran out of the house, and they were calling to the other 5 children that shared a room up in the attic, and those 5 children never escaped the house if they were still in it. And that is kind of the mystery, is whether or not those 5 children were still in the house and burned up in the fire, or whether or not they were not in the house and had been kidnapped.
Yes.
So, so George Sotter, he was originally from Italy, and he moved to America when he was 13 years old, apparently with an older brother. But the older brother, as soon as they cleared customs at Ellis Island, he went back to Italy. So he just left the 13-year-old George by himself in America. And George never talked about why he left Italy and moved to America. So eventually he worked on the railroads in Pennsylvania, and afterwards took a more permanent job working as a driver in West Virginia, and eventually started his own trucking company, usually hauling fill dirt to construction sites and hauling coal that was mined in the region. He met Jenny Cipriani, who was a storekeeper's daughter and also lived in Smithers, West Virginia, and was also an immigrant from Italy from her childhood, and they fell in love and got married. So eventually they settled just outside of Fayetteville. And there was, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, there was a large population of Italian immigrants that lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And they did really well with their business. They were a very respected middle-class family, according to everybody else in the neighborhood. But George had a lot of very strong political opinions, and he was not quiet about them. And the one that he was the most vocal about was that he did not like the Italian dictator of the time, Benito Mussolini. And he would get into a lot of arguments with the other Italian immigrants in the neighborhood about how Benito Mussolini was running the country of Italy. And apparently, now I heard somewhere that it was his boss that he worked for as in the trucking company before he started his own trucking company. That they were, on good terms and everything, but they did fight a lot about Mussolini. But then when I'm reading on Wikipedia, it never says anything about it being his boss. So I'm not entirely sure if it was his boss or if it was someone else. But supposedly his former boss had an insurance policy on his house, so that if anything happened to the house, his former boss would get the money from the insurance company for any losses. And he tried to get more insurance and more life insurance on George.
Fuck, streaming to the wrong channel on Yellow Duck.
Oh no.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the former boss had this insurance policy on the house and was trying to get more insurance on George's life insurance itself, and George said no, and they got into an argument about that. And apparently the man said that your house will go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed because of the dirty remarks that you have been making about Mussolini. So that was about a year before the house fire occurred. At one point, he also had someone visiting his house to do like some random work in the yard or that type of thing, and they went in the backyard and looked at his what's it called? His fuse box, and said that's going to cause a fire someday, which he thought was really strange because he had just rewired the house to have an electric stove installed, and the electric company said that it was fine and that everything looked safe.
There you go.
So Christmas Eve, 1945, they with all of their children, except for the oldest one who was in the army, they were all celebrating Christmas Eve. Their oldest daughter was working at a dime store, and so she came home a little later And when she did, she had surprise presents for the younger sisters, Martha, who was 12, Jenny, who was 8, and Betty, who was 5. And they wanted to stay up a little later than they were usually allowed to so that they could play with these new toys and play with their older sister. So the mom said that that was fine. And said that they were allowed to stay up a little bit later as long as the older boys took care of taking care of the chickens and putting the cows to bed before they went to bed. And then, as usual, that they should turn out the lights and close the curtains and stuff like that before they went to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So the parents went to bed about 10:30 p.m. And at about 12:30 a.m., the mother, Jenny, woke up because there was a telephone call. And she said that it was a woman's voice that she didn't recognize, and it was asking for a name that she wasn't familiar with. She could hear laughter and clinking glasses in the background, and she told the woman that she had the wrong number, and the woman gave a weird laugh and then hung up. So Jenny went back to bed, but she noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains were not drawn downstairs, the two of the things that the children were supposed to take care of before they went to bed. So she went downstairs to check that out and saw the oldest daughter, Marion, was asleep on the living room couch. So she assumed that the other children had stayed up late with her and then had gone back up to their room in the attic to go to sleep. So she just closed the curtains and turned out the lights and went back to bed.
I think it was the BuzzFeed video I was watching on this said the house was also not locked up. Or it could have been the one I was watching where the Brit was narrating.
Okay. Yeah, the one I was reading, it didn't say anything either way, so that might be the case.
Why is this being such a pain in my ass?
So then around 1 a.m., so about another half hour later, Jenny was again woken up, this time by the sound of something hitting the roof of their house and then rolling down. She wasn't sure what it was, but just went back to sleep. And about a half hour again, she woke up, this time smelling smoke. When she did get up, she found that the office room of the house had caught fire, and the telephone, around where the telephone line and the fuse box were. So she woke up her husband and grabbed their 2-year-old and yelled for the other kids to run out of the house. So both of the parents, the 3 oldest children, and the 2-year-old all escaped the house. But the other 5 children did not. They were frantically yelling to the children upstairs, but didn't hear any response. At this point, the stairway was already on fire, so the father couldn't run up the stairs to get them. So he was trying to figure out another way to get to the children upstairs and seemed thwarted by everything that he was trying to do. So the phone wasn't working when they were trying to call the fire department. So the oldest daughter, Marion, ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but couldn't get through to them at the neighbor's house either. They don't think that there was an operator on duty since it was Christmas Eve. And then went to another neighbor's house, and as well, another neighbor saw that the house was on fire and went to a nearby tavern, but they were also unsuccessful at trying to reach the fire department because the phone at the tavern was broken. Eventually, they had to just go directly to the fire department in town to report that the house was on fire. The father, George, he tried climbing up the attic window and cut his arm on a pane of glass in the process. Still wasn't able to get up to the attic room where the kids usually slept. So then he went to get a ladder so he could climb up there, and he usually kept the ladder propped up against the house in the same spot, but it wasn't there. So then he tried to get a water barrel to extinguish the fire, but it was frozen solid. So then he tried to get one of his trucks so that he could back the truck up to the house so that he could get on top of that and try and get to the attic window that way. But neither of his trucks would start, even though they were working perfectly fine the day before.
Mm-hmm.
So they had no other choice. They just had to watch the house burn down over the next 45 minutes and assume that their children had perished in the house fire. Um, the next day, the fire chief finally came. I believe it was about 7 hours from when they got hold of the police chief to when the fire department actually showed up to the house. A big part of that is that the police chief was not able to drive the fire truck himself, so he had to wait until one of the firefighters that could drive the truck showed up. And again, they were all volunteer firefighters. They were short staffed because of the war, and so many men were um, deployed into fighting in the war. So there weren't a lot of firefighters. They weren't on duty because it was Christmas Eve. So it was 7 hours before they were able to get to the house to try and put out the fire, which at that point, the house was already burnt down. There was nothing they were really going to be able to do. But according to other reports, the firefighting station wasn't really equipped to handle this kind of house fire anyway. They didn't have the proper ventilation equipment for the firefighters to actually go into a burning house and survive themselves. They would have gotten smoke inhalation, so they probably wouldn't have been able to go into the house to try and save the children anyway, even if they had been there earlier. When they did get there that morning, they looked through the ashes of the burnt house, and they weren't able to find any remains of the other 5 children. So they told the parents to leave the site as it was so that the fire marshal's office could conduct an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
But after 4 days, George and his wife couldn't bear the sight of it anymore, and he bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site with the intention of converting it into a memorial garden for the lost children. The inquest that they did the next day said that the fire was caused by faulty wiring, which George never believed because he'd had it checked out when he installed the electric stove. And also, they believe that the fire started closer to the top floor and then spread down, which wouldn't make sense if it had started from the faulty wiring from the fuse box.
Yes.
But they didn't really have a way to prove that themselves to the fire department. That's just what they personally believed. So as time went on, they started to question a lot of what they were being told by the police. One of the things was that when the fire started and they had the smoke and everything, there were still lights on in the house. There were still Christmas lights on. And if it had been faulty wiring, there shouldn't have been any electricity to the house anymore. It should have shorted out when the fire started. They finally found the ladder that was missing from the side of the house at the bottom of an embankment that was 75 feet away. They were told that the phone line had not been burned through in the fire like they thought. It had been cut by someone who willingly climbed up the telephone pole and cut the telephone line. The neighbors said that they saw a man trying to steal from the property during the time of the fire, and he was talked to by police and admitted to the theft, but he claimed that he was not the one that cut he said he was the one that cut the phone line, but he thought he was cutting a power line, but he didn't have anything to do with the fire. They didn't end up questioning him very much, and there's not a whole lot of information on who he was or anything like that from the police. They just believed his story and didn't get any more information from him or report it to the family. So then Jenny had problems like accepting that the children's bodies were just completely burned in the fire. So she started to get animal bodies and burn them herself to see if she could get a fire hot enough that would destroy all of the bones of these different animals, and she was not able to do that. She was never able to get the fire to completely consume and burn all of the bones of the animal bodies. So she did not believe that her children had died in the house fire, and just that had burned so hot that their bones and all evidence of them was destroyed. She also contacted a local crematorium and asked them about it, and they said that even when people are cremated and bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, that there are still bone fragments that are left over that should have been found.
Yes.
Let alone in a house, which wouldn't have burned as hot as 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yes. Also, in the video I was watching, which I should have gotten the source on it. The guy was saying that he had a relative who worked in the fire department where he was,
Mm-hmm.
and they were saying that with the way the house was, or the type of house it was, where it was all tinder and stuff.
Yeah, it was a wooden house.
It burnt to the house it burned to the ground within 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And those type of temperatures would have to be sustained for at least 2 hours to get bone to disintegrate.
Right. And that was definitely not the
No,
case.
that house would not have gotten hot enough and been hot enough for long enough for that to happen.
So then they questioned if the phone call was somehow connected to the fire and the disappearance of the children, but eventually the police were able to locate the woman that had made the phone call, and it really was a wrong number. She didn't have anything to do with what happened as far as they could find. So they planted flowers where the house had been, and Jenny took care of this garden for the rest of her life. She was dedicated to this memorial for her children and was always taking care of it. Let's see. So they started trying to get information on if the fire had been started by someone, if it was caused by some type of arson. And they found a driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville on Christmas Eve said that he saw some people throwing balls of fire at the house. A few months later, when the snow had melted, they found a small dark green rubber ball-like object on their property, and George, recalling what Jenny had said about hearing a noise and then something rolling down the roof, he believes that it was something like a pineapple bomb, hand grenade, or other incendiary device that would have been used during that time during the war. But again, he didn't have any way to really prove that. They also started to find a lot of witness reports of sightings of the children. One of their neighbors said that they had seen the children watching the fire from the road, but she was in a passing car, but she wasn't able to see who was driving the car. And then another woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, North Carolina, said that she remembers serving the children breakfast the next morning, so on Christmas morning, and that they got into a car with a Florida license plate, but she doesn't remember anything about who they were with.
Sorry that I'm not being really interactive right here. I'm in the middle of fighting with this BS.
Yeah, you're good. Okay, so then there was, they were saying that it was weird that there were no remains found, and this is when the fire chief Morris said, "Oh, I had actually found a heart, and I didn't want to show it to you. I didn't want it to make you more upset. So I put it in a box and secretly buried it." So he took them to where the heart was buried, dug up the box, and gave it to them. And they took it to a funeral director who examined it and said it was a beef liver and that it had never been exposed to fire. So I don't know what that's about, other than just it's very possible that if someone kidnapped the 5 children, that they also paid off the fire department and the police department, that they were somehow involved in this, and had the fire chief, sorry, I keep saying police chief, the fire chief lie to them and try and produce fake evidence of the body with this buried beef liver that he was saying was the heart of one of the children. Um, and I mean, I don't know how much I buy into a lot of stories when it's like, oh, the police were in on it and they were being paid off and blah blah blah. In most cases, like it just seems like a lot.
Yeah.
Like they try and make it into the former boss who had the insurance policy on the house, but it wasn't enough money to be able to pay off. I mean, if you're doing it for money, why are you paying off the police and fire chief?
Yeah. Well, and there's even question as to whether or not that insurance salesman even threatened them or anything. Why is my old password correct? There's no
Yeah,
reason.
so it's, it's the most likely sounding story, and it still doesn't sound very likely, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of that, though, the father George, he personally looked into every single lead he could find. Every sighting that he heard about, he personally went to go investigate and see if it was his children.
Oh yeah, even when I mean, were you going to talk about Betty or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he saw a picture in a magazine of children at a school in New York, and one of them looked like his daughter Betty, who was 5 at the time that they had gone missing. And he drove all the way to New York to this school and repeatedly demanded to see the girl himself or talk to her parents, but they would not give him any information about her. He wrote to the FBI and ended up corresponding directly with J. Edgar Hoover, who said that he would like to be of service, but the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come with the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. So the local authorities were going to have to request the FBI's assistance themselves, which they refused to do. So the FBI did not get involved at all. So then he found someone else to look over the site of the fire and see if they could find anything belonging to the children. And they were able to find several small fragments of human vertebrae. So they sent this to the Smithsonian. They found it to be the lumbar vertebrae. And from the same person, they had started to become fused together. So they believed that the individual at the time of death would have been about 17 years old, likely no older than 22 years old, because there was still a part that was unfused that's usually fused together by age 23. But the problem is that the oldest of the missing children was 14. So even though they found this vertebrae, it was very unlikely that it was from a 14-year-old. It was much likely from someone between 17 and 22. So it wasn't any of their children. It also had not been involved in a fire at all. So they think that what happened with those bone fragments is that it was part of the soil that he put on top of the location where the fire happened when he was planting the garden. And they don't believe that those vertebrae remains were in any way related to his children. They don't know what's happened to the vertebrae now. The Smithsonian had returned it back to George, and no one knows what he did with it from there. So from there, the police decided that the case was hopeless and they closed it at the state level.
That's so sad.
So the FBI said, well, we can look into it as a possible interstate kidnapping. We have jurisdiction over that. But after 2 years of following every lead they could find, they didn't find any information that really led to any better information or leads on what might have happened to the children. So after 2 years, they closed their case as well. So at this point, the Sodders started printing flyers and also put up a billboard at the site of where the house was.
And I will be putting up a picture of the billboard on the Instagram, on all of the stuff later.
So they had one next to the state route that they lived near, and they had one at the house site itself. And they maintained these billboards until 1989 when Jenny died. So they had these billboards up for over 40 years. And it had pictures of the 5 missing children and was offering at first a $5,000 reward, which was soon turned to a $10,000 reward. And I'm sorry, I don't have the conversion amount of what that would be today. But that's a decent amount of money for a reward today.
I'm sorry, what were the numbers? I'll look it up on the inflation later.
The $5,000 reward, and then it was a $10,000 reward.
Okay, and that was in 45, or was that the year after?
It was in 1952.
Okay. Okay, so 1950 what?
52.
52. The amount was $5,000. Calculate. Really? $52,186 for the $5,000 reward.
Okay.
And man, inflation has gone cray-cray.
Right. But it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money.
104,373 for the 10.
How much?
104,373 for the 10,000.
So that's a lot of money back then.
A very substantial amount of money.
Yeah, and they had those up for 40 years. You know, if anybody led to even them finding out what happened to just one of the 5 children that was missing.
Yeah.
They still would get different leads that wouldn't end up turning up any more information. You know, they at one point it was questioned if one of the daughters, Martha, was being held in a convent in Missouri. There were claims that the 2 boys were living in Texas. And George would go and investigate all of them. At one point, they said that Jenny had distant relatives in Florida that had children that looked just like theirs. And he went down to Florida and demanded to see the children and have it be proved to him that they were not his kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day they received a letter, and it was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside this letter was a picture of a young man around 30 with features that very much resembled their son, Louis. Immediately when they saw this picture, they're like, that's Louis. That is a picture of our son, Louis. He was 9 years old when he went missing, but this is what he would have looked like at 30, I guess. His nose, his eyes, his eyebrow shape all looked very similar to them. And they were like, oh my God, this is our kid. But it didn't have a return address at all. There was no actual letter saying anything else. It was just the picture. And on the back of the picture, it said, Louis Sotter, I love brother Frankie, Lil Boys. And then A90132 or 35. They had no idea what any of this meant. He did not have a brother named Frankie, so they don't know what the I love brother Frankie means. But it made them feel like there was a chance that their son was still alive. And they added that picture to their billboards that they had up without giving too much of the rest of the information, so that they could try and, like, if someone came forward with more information, they would be able to tell if someone was lying or not through the evidence that they didn't post on the billboard.
Mhm.
But nothing else ever came of that. But they also enlarged the photo and kept it over their fireplace. They really believed this was their son, and that it was the only evidence that they had that he was still alive. So George Sotter died in 1969, and Jenny and the surviving children, except their son John, I don't remember how old he was at the time of the fire, but he didn't like talking about it anymore, and he kept telling them that they needed to move on with their lives. But Jenny and the other 3 children, they kept, for the rest of their lives, they kept looking for these kids and never gave up. Jenny died in 1989, and that is when the family took down the billboards that they had put up. They still continued to publicize the case and check out any leads that they found. They've theorized that the Sicilian mafia was trying to extort money from George, and that the children may have been taken by someone who knew about the arson and wanted to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
They suspect that they may have been taken back to Italy. And they believe that if the siblings knew that the parents were still looking for them, that they avoided contacting them in order to keep them from being harmed as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Sylvia, the youngest daughter, she was 2 when the fire happened. She died this year.
She has a daughter named Jenny, though, who's continuing
Yes.
the work.
Yeah, her daughter is continuing to still look for them. And her daughter said that she promised the grandparents that she wouldn't let the story die, and that she would do everything that she could, and she did do everything that she could up until she passed away herself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically the story of the Sodder children. That we don't know what happened to them. It seems unlikely that they burned up in the fire, because their remains were never found. It sounds very likely that they were kidnapped, but it's still such a strange story. You know, I don't believe that the insurance salesman or the former boss, the 2 stories, the Wikipedia article has it as the insurance salesman, and from what you were watching, it was the insurance salesman. From the Morbid podcast, they were talking about the former boss. So I'm not entirely sure if they're the same person. But I don't know.
I've been so totally distracted, but did you read out what it was the insurance salesman had said to them, supposedly?
Yeah, he said that their... I read it at the beginning, that their children would be destroyed, and that their house would be burned down or something, or would go up in smoke. Their house would go up in smoke. But I just... if you're doing it for money, they didn't, like, the articles that I'm reading didn't give the amount on what the insurance policy was. They had given an amount on the Morbid podcast show that was like $1,500 or something like that. That's not enough money to pay off. I mean, even if I'm wrong and it wasn't $1,500, if it was $15,000, which was a substantial amount of money at the time, that's not enough to pay off an entire police force and fire department. It's not. It's not enough money to pay to fly 5 children to Italy.
No.
It's not.
I'm trying to look at, see if I can find that amount for you. Let's see.
And even if you did steal the children, if you were doing it for money and it was for $15,000, the fact that they were offering $10,000 for anything, you could just tell them and get the $10,000 too. It seems unlikely that money was the only motivating factor of whatever happened. It just seems unlikely to me because they were offering a lot of money to find out what happened to their kids.
Yes. So
again, on the Morbid podcast, I believe they said 1,500, not 15,000.
yeah, it's not.
And that's not that much money, but I feel like even 15,000.
I'm trying to find it real quick.
Even with that being a substantially larger amount of money, that seems really unlikely that you'd be able to pay off the fire department, the police department, fly the children to Italy.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that was posited, because even now this is still a problem, but especially back in the 40s when we didn't have DNA testing and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
The black market for children is intense, and people are willing to pay a lot of money in order to avoid the red tape of adoption. And I can tell you, which honestly, I don't know how these families that screw up the kids and like serial adopt, I don't know how they're getting approved, because it's something that I've been looking into, and it's a lot of red tape. You have to have oh my god, my brain went blank. Yeah, but you have to be able to prove that you can provide for the children financially.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the home inspections and so forth. I'm not sure exactly if it was the same in the 40s as it is now, where you have to have a physician sign off that you're healthy enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still an incredibly lengthy process. You wait years to get a kid. Or you try to do the foster to adopt for older children. If you mostly it's foster to adopt, and it is such a messy, lengthy process. You have to go back and forth with fighting with the family. At any point in time, you could lose the kids. They could be whether it's from their legal guardians being reinstated, or if other family comes in and claims the kid. So it's a messy process, and people are willing to pay to go outside of it onto the black market for these kids.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what you're talking about, it could end up being worth enough.
Yeah, I mean that's fair if they were sold on the black market, which wasn't something that they really looked into. They believed that the kids were taken back to Italy by someone, and that it was because of the political beliefs of the father upsetting the
Yeah,
other Irish immigrants.
questioned about that.
Yeah. So it's like that's the part that I don't believe. I don't believe
No,
someone
I don't see why they
with
would have
kids
taken him
back to
to
Italy.
Italy, especially where there were so many people. And I mean, it happens in every case where people will claim they saw this or that or whatever. But even to the fact that George saw saw that picture and was like, "That's Betty."
Right.
I am not finding where the boss would have had an insurance policy on the house. I'm just not finding that.
Okay. So maybe it was just the insurance agent then. I'm not sure. Yeah, that was just I listened to the Morbid podcast today, and that's what they were saying. So I'm like, I don't want to not
Google's
offer.
gonna be at me about this. How much so it also gets mad when I do very specific. So we'll see if it child suffer on the black market 1945. Let's see if we've got. Okay, that's some post-war Berlin now. That's something completely. Okay, 67. Babies being sold at fast-growing black market at the charge from anywhere from 5,000. Okay, I'm gonna have to do a little bit of calculating here.
Okay. Well, I have a penny. So
Okay,
that's important.
$5,000 for an illegal adoption. So
Oh.
let's do. I need to backwards inflation calendar this or inflation calculate this. Excuse me. If in 1976 I paid $5,000, then in 1945 really? Okay. So it looks like it would be around $1,600 in 45. So
Okay.
let me now calculate that to now. 1945. Because the article I saw was for brain for 1976. So I backwards calculated that to 45, and now I'm going to frontwards calculate that to higher. G21, and the answer is about $25,000, 25 grand per kid.
Okay. That's also about the amount that they had on the insurance on the house.
Yeah, so you're looking at
So I mean, it's not
25
a
grand. You have 100 grand right there, and then you have another 25 grand on the house.
yeah. So I'm not saying it's not an insignificant amount that they had on the house, but it wasn't enough to take the kids,
or in today's dollars, I should say,
to Italy. Just the
Yeah.
amount from the house
No,
is
no,
not
no.
enough to pay off the police and the fire department and fly the kids to Italy. That's the part I don't believe. It is
No,
a
flying the
significant amount of
kids
money,
to
though.
Italy makes no sense.
Right.
But I mean, yeah.
It's just that,
Yeah.
the sightings, I mean, there was a woman that came forward and said that she had seen the kids staying at a hotel,
Yeah.
and she tried to talk to them, and they were with two women and two men that were of Italian descent. And when she tried to talk to the kids, the two men started talking to them very aggressively in Italian, and the kids didn't speak to her again, and they left the next morning. But she did not see the news report to be like, oh, I saw those kids, until 2 years after it happened. And then she didn't come forward for another 5 years. So who knows how accurate that is. But there weren't any other there weren't any other sightings that sounded plausible after hers, which was 1 week after the fire. So there is the question of like what did happen to them, because no one had seen them after that. I mean, there were a few, there were still tips coming in, but none of them were proven. So other than, the picture of a boy that looked like their son Lewis and a picture of a girl that looked like Betty, that they could not find any other information on to actually find if it was them or not. No one saw the kids after a week after the fire.
Yeah. Oh my God, my brain just died. I had a point to make. I don't know what it was. Oh, yeah, no, I was saying mostly I think a lot of it was just gross negligence.
Mm-hmm.
You had a volunteer fire department Christmas Eve, so it took them, depending on which account of when they arrived, it took them approximately 7 hours to get there.
Mm-hmm.
At which point, what's the point? I don't even know what the point is in showing up 7 hours later, but whatevs.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's find some quotes. Oh no, we're on time. We're coming up to time. We're close enough. I still have no idea what the flip case I'm doing for next week. It will be announced ahead of time.
All right.
It will happen. And I will add more photos and stuff. I've got some news articles and fun stuff like that to put on our social media accounts about this case. So we'll go up tomorrow. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but most of the pictures and stuff that we have from the Sotter family were provided by Sylvia Sodder. I may or may not have mentioned that. I don't remember. All right. So thank you, everybody who joined in. We will figure out the Instagram next time. That close to having it figured out. But remember to...
That is my dog whining. Sorry.
Anna.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Usually it's hi, Penny, but lately it's been hi, Anna.
Right.
She keeps trying to lick your face to death while we're broadcasting.
She tries to do it all the time. I'm slightly allergic to her saliva, so I don't want her to lick my face. So she wants to lick my face all the time.
Right? You need to just get a cardboard cutout of your face that you can just hold in front of.
Oh yeah, there we go. She can just lick that.
All right, guys. We will see you next week. Same time, same place. We are streaming as soon as we get the Instagram figured out, because we used to just stream on Instagram, but we're working on this. But we are streaming on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So okay, next week, same time, same places. Right. And remember, be a bitch,
carry a big stick,
and don't get murdered.